If you've followed this channel for any amount of time, you probably know that I absolutely love JRPGs. They've been one of my foundational game genres since I was a child, and they count for a disproportionate share of my favorite games of all time. As such, I definitely enjoy the Final Fantasy series, at least for the most part. However, one installment that definitely didn't resonate with me was Final Fantasy VIII, which is interesting, because that game just happens to be in the news right now, as Director Yoshinori Kitase would appear to be in full agreement with my reasoning. This is Little Akiba Games. I'm Patrick. Welcome back to the shop. I didn't see this one coming, friends, but when talking to IGN about Final Fantasy VIII's 25th anniversary this year, the conversation followed recent rhetoric surrounding the franchise and the topic of a remake came up, during which Kitase cited the game's divisive junction system as a problem in such a project. I couldn't agree more, because for all the times I've honestly tried to enjoy Final Fantasy VIII over the years since it launched in 1999, the junction system in general, and the draw mechanic in particular, always got in the way. Despite that, I kept trying to appreciate the game while focusing on its redeeming qualities in hopes of somehow cracking the gameplay open and having some sort of breakthrough that just never came. I've talked before on this channel about how even narrative-intensive games like JRPGs still have to be good at being video games at the core before they can be called quality products, and I really wanted to believe there was a quality product at the heart of Final Fantasy VIII. 25 years on, it might be there, but I still haven't found it, but that doesn't mean I think it's beyond saving. All this time, I've inwardly tossed around ideas about what could make it a better game, and Kitase's comments to IGN have inspired me to revisit those ideas here and share them with you. Here's how I would handle a Final Fantasy VIII remake. One big ground rule off the jump. This is not going to be a remake in the sense that the Final Fantasy VII Remake is. We're not leaving the RPG genre to make an action game. We're not making any major changes to the story, only rewriting it to deliver and explain certain concepts better. We're putting a fresh coat of 9th gen paint on it and fixing the problems with the gameplay of the original release, but otherwise leaving it alone. So the one big change that all other gameplay changes are going to stem from is that I would remove magic as a consumable resource altogether. Instead, spells would be treated just like Guardian Force. When you have one, you have it. It goes right into the character's deck of 32 spells and stays there until it is transferred, discarded, or refined, saving players the time of grinding up full stacks of their spells. Once upon a time, I felt like simply increasing the draw ratios would solve everything, and the remaster added a speed-up option, but both of those ideas really just put a band-aid on the real problem, where this is an actual solution. Now, there's a lot to unpack with that one change alone, so let me explain how this would work in practice. As spells are no longer disposable, this requires the return of MP as a mechanic. Some might complain that this would detract from one of Final Fantasy VIII's particular quirks, but it has to be done in order to fix the broader gameplay system. This also means that MPJ would be added as a statistical junction slot that you can unlock. This would also require a closer look at how junction is calculated, since statistical boosts would no longer be based on the number of any particular spell junctioned. I think treating a spell as equivalent to a stack of 50 to 70 of that same spell in the original release would be a perfectly fair way of implementing junctions in this new system without pushing buffs to the more absurd heights that we saw back in the day. I saw that as a spot of poor communication in-game than anything. The game never really explained what spell counts it was tuned toward, and it made sense to want to be optimal, so naturally optimal players were going to carry full stacks of 100 of each spell they planned to junction, right? This new, more uniform method would go a long way to help Kitase and his team enforce their original intentions, whether that's 50 to 70 of any given spell as I would suggest, or some other figure entirely, while also respecting the time of players who would otherwise grind stacks of 100 when given the ability to do so. Now let's talk about junctioning. I've already touched on the inclusion of an MPJ slot to go along with the introduction of MP as a resource in this new theoretical version of Final Fantasy VIII, but that's really the only outright new addition to the list. However, the junction system itself is going to be fundamentally adjusted to account for the fact that spells are no longer a consumable resource. Specifically, spells that are junctioned are made entirely unavailable for casting. You can't use Ultima to buff your magic attack and then start casting it on everything you come across, for example. but keeping the same 32 slots in each character's spell deck from the original game should give you plenty of room for creativity and optimization. I would largely keep the actual implementation of junctioning the same, with exceptions pertaining to the elemental and status junction slots. These would not be accounted for when setting automated HP, attack, or defense builds, nor could spells placed in those slots be removed from them when performing an auto-junction. I think auto-junction was skipped completely by a lot of people for the simple fact that it could screw up your elemental and status setup, forcing players to junction everything by hand to prevent that from happening, forcing them into the less intuitive aspects of the system. Of course, all of this would also require fundamental changes to magic refinement, because refining X number of one spell into Y number of another just doesn't work when spells are no longer consumable. Instead, there would be spell recipes, where 2 or 3 specific spells will refine into a new, more advanced spell. Cure and Poisona could combine to make Cura, for example, or Fire and Poison could form Fyra. I'll leave you to work out the exhaustive list of potential recipes, but it seems to be the natural solution to unconsumable spells. Let me know down in the comments what you come up with. In the Laguna scenes, the inclusion of a HUD tell letting you know whose junctions and spell decks are being used by which party members is absolutely mandatory. The two-sided narrative is one of Final Fantasy VIII's undeniable cool factors, but it was executed with all the convenience of a 50-car queue for an understaffed McDonald's at 2 in the morning. It would need to be made easier to understand in any remake. Finally, one last note on the draw system. While you would no longer have to draw multiple copies of each spell, I would still leave in the statistical possibility of a failed draw. I think that's fair. We're still reducing what could be a 40 to 60 turn process for some characters, down to just 2 or 3 in similar cases. 4 at absolute worst. Zell. Moving on to other stuff. Honestly, I've never been a big fan of the GF Boost minigame, and while I'd love to say I had a solution for that, the truth is, I don't. And would probably leave it be, or at most, replace it with some sort of QTE that won't kill your hands trying to get a fully charged summon. The boring gray interface has to go. It's a small thing, but it's one of the weird, unsettling elements that made Final Fantasy VIII feel extremely other when the game dropped. It can stay as an option, but the classic blue is going to make a return in my version as the new default. There are already some PC mods that do this, as shown here, for which I'm very grateful. It's hard to overstate just what a difference this would make, especially to the really long-time fans of the series. Now, the Final Fantasy VIII soundtrack is right up there near, if not among, Nobuo Uematsu's finest from over the years, but there's a distinct step back on the aggression compared to the last few games to come before it. Tracks like Force Your Way, The Man with the Machine Gun, and The Extreme, perhaps with a truncated intro, would absolutely stay in remixed form, ideally by Final Fantasy XIV and XVI composer Masayoshi Soken. And yes, I already know Soken took his turn with Force Your Way in Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers, that's no reason not to double dip here. But there are other tunes that would particularly need to be retooled or even replaced. The one I want to single out here is Don't Be Afraid, which felt just as soft compared to Final Fantasy VII's Those Who Fight, as Those Who Fight did compared to Final Fantasy VI's iconic battle themes. This was an unfortunate pattern that really didn't do the games any favors as they became more experimental in all aspects of their design over the years. There would need to be a course correction here to get this soundtrack hitting as hard as it could, and frankly needs to. Over the course of this video, I've mentioned the concept of spell decks, and I'm not referring to anything necessarily new by talking about those, but I do find it to be a better way of explaining to players each character's limited list of 32 drawn spells at any given time. Making it clear to players off the jump is a far better approach than letting them figure it out for themselves by scrutinizing the interface at length, or worse, when they get a rare opportunity to draw doubles or triples and can't because they're already capped out of their allotment of 32 spells. Maybe even include an on-screen warning when a character gets to 28 or 30 spells so they know to adjust before they hit the ceiling. Additionally, with the casting restriction on junctioned magic, it will eventually, hopefully, force players to use all 32 spell slots wisely. I'm aware that this theoretical Final Fantasy VIII Remake doesn't mesh entirely with Kitase's comments about the junction system, but he really made it sound like he would want to dispose of it entirely, while I think that would be tantamount to throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Rather, even as one of the system's biggest detractors, I feel that there's a fun and deep customization mechanic to be found in junctioning with only a fair bit of fine-tuning. Honestly, if I had the programming knowledge to work with, I'd go ahead and attempt to make a comprehensive mod to the PC remaster to implement these changes myself. Hopefully someone out there who does have the talent sees this video and agrees with me enough to take a crack at it. Or better still, this video finds its way into the right eyes and ears at Square Enix itself. It's good to dream, right? But what say you? Let me know down in the comments what you would think of this theoretical remake of Final Fantasy VIII, or maybe share your own ideas if you have them. Let's get a conversation going about it, because this has been a subject I've found thoroughly fascinating for years. That's all for now. As always, if you like this video, then please be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. We're still on that push to 1,000 subscribers in 2024, and as of this recording, we're about to hit the milestone of 300 community members, up nearly 100 from just the fall channel rebrand. Click the notification bell to know right away when the next video drops. I look forward to seeing you back here next time at Little Akiba Games.